Hello everyone, welcome to my channel SW Metro official channel.
Meri Brown's Secrets Exposed has become the fandom's drumbeat, less a verdict than a question mark wrapped in history, memory, and the contradictions that have animated Sister Wives from its earliest seasons to its fractured present, and that's exactly why the pre-special chatter feels like a slow-motion landslide, 1,000 tiny pebbles of moments, miscommunications, edits, Instagram captions, confessionals, and whispered DMs cascading into a single thundering narrative about what Meri did. What she didn't do, what she allowed, what she endured, and what she strategically left unsaid as the Brown family unraveled in front of millions, yet even as explosive family allegations ricochet across timelines and group chats, what we're really watching is a high-wire act between perception and presentation, a woman who spent years learning to be seen and unseen at once, to claim loyalty while negotiating distance, to be the first wife and, eventually, to stand almost entirely alone. Which is why, on the eve of a tell-all, the word exposed lands less like a revelation and more like a final peeling away of the wallpaper, layers of curated calm over hairline cracks that have always been visible if you knew where to look, because viewers remember the early years when Meri, with her steady, carefully measured cadence, claimed a kind of quiet authority in the family's origin story. She was the legal wife, the gatekeeper of tone, the one who could calibrate warmth and frost in the same breath, and they remember the mid-era tremors when proximity turned into problem-solving and problem-solving turned into power audits, when the family's move, the business ventures, and the shifting attention map tightened and then frayed connections, when 1,000 tiny "we'll talk later"s accumulated into a backlog of never-talked-about anythings, and they remember the long tail of silence and second chances. Those unresolved scenes where Meri would lay out a boundary in soft focus. "I'm fine, it's fine, this is fine," and then walk it back with a single brittle smile, a pattern that made fans ask whether her restraint was a stoic strength or a strategy for survival, especially as the show's gravity bent harder toward newer marriages, separate houses, and solo confessionals that didn't quite line up, the way a song's lyrics don't always match its melody, so when pre-tell-all allegations revive old questions. Did Meri hold on too long? Did she weaponize distance? Did she trade transparency for leverage? Was she scapegoated for systemic problems the whole family carried? What they're really doing is trying to reconstruct years of context from fragments and edits, remembering that on reality TV, motive is a house built with windows facing the camera and walls facing the cutting room floor. The secrets in this pre-special moment aren't cloak and dagger bombshells as much as they are the emotional physics of a plural marriage that was always negotiating scarce resources, time, affection, status, attention, and that scarcity, not any single person's flaw, became the background radiation of the Brown universe, altering each orbit, shifting each confession, tinting each moment of compassion with a tiny shadow of accounting, who got what, when, why, and with what unspoken cost. We've seen how Meri's carefully moderated tone, never too loud, never fully raw, functioned as both armor and ambiguity, how her pauses could feel like doorways you weren't invited to walk through, how her half-smiles could read as peace treaties or ceasefires depending on the week, and how, over time, that cultivated opacity gave way to the charge that she was hiding in plain sight, especially as the family's conflicts escalated from solvable logistics to existential choices about identity, place, and belonging, and yes, layered into the public record are chapters that can't be ignored. The highly public catfishing debacle years ago, widely discussed and dissected, which left a residue of distrust and turned Meri into both subject and object of internet autopsies, a person held up as a cautionary tale and a wounded figure looking for connection in a life that had become both expansive and isolating, and though that saga has been parsed to death, its emotional aftermath lingered long after the headlines faded, shaping how every side-eye and sidestep would be interpreted in seasons to come, as if Meri's every move were now annotated by the past, yet explosive. Family allegations are often less about a single action and more about interpretive frames, who tells the story, who owns the frame, and how the music swells under a particular cut, and heading into a tell-all, the family's competing narratives sound like overlapping radio stations. One signal insists that Meri clung to a version of the family that no longer existed, extending olive branches that were actually measuring sticks. Another insists she was written out of the warmth and then told her chilliness caused the winter. Still another claims she learned to speak softly so the edits would have to scream for her, turning restraint into the loudest sound on the soundtrack, and running underneath all of it is the unavoidable math of reality television, where empathy has to share a seat with engagement metrics, and where exposed is as much a production term as a moral one. What gets missed in the spicy summaries, though, is the profoundly human truth that Meri's posture, ever the composed face, the round vowels, the clipped agreements, was forged in the furnace of a family that asked everyone to be selfless even when self-authorship was the only path out of invisibility, and that contradiction carved grooves into every relationship. How do you belong without dissolving yourself? How do you step away without turning your back? How do you keep faith with a covenant that keeps changing its terms? So, when whispers circulate that Meri allegedly stirred the pot in private while preaching peace in public, or allegedly held receipts to wield at crucial moments, or allegedly sided with one household against another, it's worth noticing how each allegation mirrors a fear held by someone else in the family, a projection of scarcity. If I'm not chosen, someone must be choosing against me. If I'm not heard, someone must be whispering louder. If I'm not seen, someone must be standing in front of the camera. And Meri, first wife, central figure, then increasingly peripheral, became the perfect screen for those anxieties, partly because she curated mystery and partly because mystery was the only control left to her when the narrative tide moved on. Even now, the pre-tell-all storm is drawing energy from unanswered texts and off-camera check-ins, from who visited whom after a crisis and who didn't, from who posted a cryptic quote and who liked it, from who framed their healing as independence and who framed it as betrayal, and in the middle sits Meri's insistence, articulated in different ways across seasons, that her choices were about dignity, self-respect, and the right to define her own next chapter without shredding anyone else's, a claim that sounds noble until you put it next to someone else's pain, at which point it sounds evasive. And that paradox is exactly why tell-alls exist, not to solve mysteries but to stage them, to let each person speak their fragment and trust the audience to assemble a mosaic from mismatched tiles. Ultimately, secrets in this context are less about indictments and more about interpretations of distance, the late-night drives to think, the separate holidays that were framed as scheduling conflicts, the room in the house that was always neat because no one else ever entered, the hopeful returns to shared projects that never quite caught fire, the sharp way a sentence ends when someone doesn't want to reveal what comes next. And going into the special, it's likely that Meri's segment will be a master class in poised revelation. She will confirm what she's already hinted, reiterate her desire for goodwill, and challenge the suggestion that her boundaries were barbed wire rather than gentle fences, all while allowing just enough oxygen for skeptics to insist the real story remains just off camera. None of this makes Meri a villain or a saint, it makes her a seasoned participant in a very specific machine, one that turns private evolution into public content, one that invites candor but punishes messiness, one that asks you to be authentic while holding you accountable for how authenticity plays with viewers who only see pieces. If there is an explosion coming, it will be the collision between long-suppressed grief and the clarity that comes with the end of a shared myth. The recognition that the big family they built together is now a constellation of solo orbits and that saying so out loud can feel like betrayal even when it's mercy, and Meri's role, as written by the show and revised by the audience, has been to carry the contradiction with immaculate posture, to insist she's fine until she isn't, and to speak in calm sentences that land like thunder because they reveal that the quiet was holding so much weight. So perhaps the real exposure here is not some secret ledger of misdeeds but the ledger of costs, the cost of being the first to believe and the last to let go. The cost of being edited into a symbol when you're a person, the cost of trying to keep the door open in a house that keeps building new exits, and that is the story the tell-all will circle whether it names it or not, the way one woman's careful privacy became a magnet for other people's fears, the way allegations fill the gaps left by unsaid truths, the way family on reality TV is both shelter and spotlight, a promise that warms and a heat that burns, in the end, as the countdown to the special ticks down and the comments flood with certainty dressed as insight. It's worth holding two things at once. First, that everyone in the Brown story is telling the truth as they experienced it, and second, that those truths do not add up neatly, because life seldom does, least of all under the gaze of a lens, and that's why, when someone whispers that Meri Brown's secrets are exposed, what they really mean is that the story has reached a chapter where ambiguity no longer comforts Anyone, where every old scene is being reread with ruthless hindsight, where every polite smile looks like a lock and every aborted sentence sounds like a key, and where the woman at the center, so often accused of saying too little or saying it too late, now gets to speak in full, not to convince the unconvinced but to reclaim the nouns and verbs of her own life, and whatever explosive allegations surface around that testimony will crackle for a news cycle and then fade, while the deeper revelation, the quiet, complicated math of staying, leaving, hoping, and hardening, will continue working on the audience long after the tell-all chairs are empty and the lights go black, because exposure is not a destination on this kind of show, it's a process, and Meri's has always been to let you think you've seen everything when really, what she's offered is a mirror. If you see secrets in it, they might be hers, or they might be your own.